Let me give everybody an update on the global health crisis and what's being done about it. So, as of last night, here are the cases. We have 219,252 cases, official cases. Again, that's different from the true cases. Official and true are much different. Official is much lower because those are the ones we've tested for and can prove. The true number of cases is at least 8 to 10 times higher than that. The number of deaths, 8,917, recovered, 83,982, unresolved, 126,353. China has the outbreak relatively under control now. There have been no new cases in Wuhan, where it originated from. Italy is still struggling massively. Even with the lockdown, their numbers are going up, so that appears to be not good, although it could just be a lag in testing that explains that. Iran is in a terrible situation because, first of all, the numbers in Iran are significantly higher than what they're reporting right there. Second of all, the government was denying it for the longest time, and you still have people acting like there's not a pandemic sweeping through the country, and it looks like the hospitals can implode. And on top of all of that, the U.S. is sanctioning them and then also added new sanctions to them, which is criminal, and more people will die as a result of it because they can't get many of the necessary medicines that they need. So it's a nightmare scenario in Iran. Spain, they're on lockdown, and you can see their case numbers there as well. If you look down at the United States, we have 8,872 cases, 138 deaths, 60 in serious condition, 4 in critical, 9 recovered. Now, listen, those numbers are way off for us because, again, we're so light on testing. We have so few tests. And I know that some people in my family are showing symptoms, and what they're told when they get in contact with a doctor is they describe their symptoms. By the way, the symptoms match perfectly with what this virus is. And they're told, I don't think you have it. What? If there's even a question, don't you want to test? The way it's working in a lot of other countries, like, I know in Scandinavia in some places, they're doing chain testing. So if you show up, you have symptoms, they test you, and then they ask everybody who you've been in contact with for a week, and then they test those people too, and they quarantine everybody. You know, South Korea, similar situation. Taiwan and Singapore handled this probably better than anybody else. Their preparedness was great because they've dealt with outbreaks in the past, not of this virus, but of viruses in the past, and so they knew exactly what to do. Us, we didn't even do basic pandemic preparedness, guys. We didn't have we didn't have the right number of ventilators, we didn't have the right number of masks. Our supply chains go to China. We don't have a good number of ICU beds. So we wasted trillions of dollars on wars, and we didn't do basic preparedness for a pandemic. In China, the health officials are wearing basically hazmat suits dealing with the cases. Here, we just got those masks. So a lot of health professionals are getting sick here. So, again, not really, really, really not good. The numbers are really, really, really not good. Now, what's Washington doing in response? Because this is where the story gets interesting. The cases are going to continue to skyrocket. In a world that made sense, we would have been on lockdown 2 weeks ago. The country would have been on lockdown 2 weeks ago. We would press pause on the stock market. We would send people emergency UBI, and do a bunch of drastic measures up front, but they drag their feet. But now, look at what's going on. So Vox says, what we know about Congress's potential $1 trillion coronavirus stimulus package. Congress is eyeing direct payments to workers as well as aid for affected industries. Before the U.S. Senate has even passed the second coronavirus relief bill, it's already started working on a massive third stimulus package the Trump administration estimates could cost $1 trillion. It would be a massive injection of cash, surpassing the bank bailout in the midst of the 2008 recession into an economy that's seen cratering stocks, spikes in unemployment claims, and reduced consumer spending as the pandemic sweeps across the U.S., and perhaps surprisingly, there's relative bipartisan support, at least for the idea of a huge stimulus, if not yet for specific proposals. Lawmakers are referring to this as Phase 3 of Congress's coronavirus response. Phase 1 was an $8.3 billion bill spurring coronavirus vaccine research and development, and Phase 2, once it's passed, will be an approximately $104 billion package largely focused on paid sick leave and unemployment benefits for workers and families. Phase 3 will be many times larger than both of the previous bills combined. As Vox's Anna North reports, the latest version of the legislation, which the Senate will consider, excludes millions of workers from paid sick days and paid leave provisions. In the most updated take on the bill, companies with 500 employees or more and companies with 50 employees or fewer can be exempted from requirements to offer workers paid sick days. Hospitals and nursing homes can also be exempted under the bill. So that bill was terrible and is terrible because it's so weak. Only 20% of workers get paid sick leave. As a result, as many as 19 million workers could be left out of paid sick leave protections, according to the Washington Post. Despite its shortcomings, the bill provides a significant influx of funding on a couple of fronts. It will boost funding to states so they can expand their unemployment insurance benefits, and it guarantees free coronavirus testing for all Americans. What we've talked about to this point, there are three bills. The first one was mostly for, research to combat the pandemic and coronavirus. It's for a vaccine. It's for treatments. Later in the show, I'll give you some updates on what we have in terms of treatments and studies that are coming out because the work is being done as quickly as possible, clearly. And you do see some of what the Democrats are pitching for the third bill. I just went through a list of some of the stuff they're pitching for a third bill for you there. But here's what else is in the third bill, and this is really interesting. So Jeff Stein says it's $50 billion for airlines, $150 billion in loans for severely distressed industries, $300 billion in business loan in a business loan program matching 6 weeks of payroll at 100%, which is with a cap of $1,540, government backstop of money markets. And the important thing to understand here is, in this third bill, they want to basically try to bail out the people. And they're only doing that because it is super necessary. Like, we are so screwed if we don't do some sort of a bailout of the people. But also, they want to marry in the same bill bailouts of industries. So the industries that are looking to be bailed out, you have, this one's hilarious, the movie industry, like theaters, airline industry, cruise ships, the casino industry has showed up hat in hand in Washington, and there are others too. So a bunch of industries are saying, hey, this is really impacting us bad, and we need a bailout, and we need it ASAP. And they're begging Washington. Also, there was the oil and gas industry. They were begging for a bailout as well, but that's not just tied to the pandemic. That's more tied to, what was happening with Saudi Arabia and Russia, but that's a longer story that we covered in a separate segment. But anyway, so everybody's asking for a bailout. Now, here's why they don't deserve it. Look at this from Li Fang. Boeing spent $43 billion on stock buybacks, helping more than double its stock price in 2017 and 2018, enriching shareholders, only to melt down from its mass-produced faulty planes that crashed, by the way, and the current coronavirus crisis. Now they need a bailout? So, here's the deal, Jack. I sound like Biden. Here's the deal, Jack. Look here. Fact of the matter is, what would I do in this situation? Well, a lot of the ideas that are being floated for the people are actually pretty decent ideas. Talking about, a moratorium on evictions and foreclosures for the duration of the crisis. Totally agree with that. Trump has signaled he's on board with that, although I don't know how far they're going to go. I'm guessing that a lot of these things are going to be watered down in the same way that the paid sick leave bill was watered down, where it only applies to 20% of workers. So most workers would have to still go to work, which is insane in a pandemic. So I'm sure they're going to water it down in a million different ways. And when we get more information, we will talk about it. But the idea of putting a freeze on essential payments, I totally agree with. I would put a freeze on, mortgage payment, rent, the necessary bills. And on top of freezing that, you also should do a UBI payment, an emergency UBI payments, everybody. Now, we're actually having a conversation about that. And this is going to blow your mind because Trump and Mnuchin said in a press conference, we want to do a direct payment to the American people. Now, some Republicans are like, okay, a one-time payment of $1,000. Okay, that's not enough. But what happened is there are some Republicans and some Democrats who are like, yes, let's do a UBI for people, emergency UBI. Cory Booker, Sherrod Brown, Bernie Sanders come out and say $2,000 a month. You have some Republicans say $1,000 a month and $500 per child. And Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer come out and say, no, we're against UBI. Even Trump is in favor of UBI. He's calling for UBI. Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are coming out and going, nope, we don't like it. We should probably means test it. Oh, sweet gee. We have a crisis on our hands. You do understand, by April 1st, people cannot pay their bills. You have to act now. You have to get the checks out now. There's no question. That's an absolute necessity. And you want to means test it? You want to give people paperwork to fill out in the middle of a pandemic? How dumb are you? Oh my God. Paperwork in the middle of a pandemic. So now it appears like they're going to agree on some terrible middle of the road. Everybody making $75,000 a year or less gets $1,000, $1,000 a month or something like that. No, you can't. You have to. Guys, I got news for you. A pandemic doesn't care what your income level is. So it's very possible that there's somebody out there making $90,000 a year, and that dude is going to get laid off because we're in a pandemic and the economy is screeching to a halt, and he's going to get fired. He's going to get fired. So the dude, maybe that dude doesn't have savings either. 78% of the country is living paycheck to paycheck. Even some people that have upper middle class income are living paycheck to paycheck. So if you say that dude does not qualify, I mean, come on, man. What do you... Emergency UBI right now. Universal UBI, universal basic income, not means-tested basic income. Emergency UBI right now. So I totally agree with that. I totally agree with halting, the necessary essential bills and payments. It looks like they're moving in that direction, but they're not moving quick enough. They got to go right now, right now, right now. But in terms of the industry's asking for a bailout, no deal. Hell no. Hell no. And here's why. We've been through this. In 2008, we went through this. What do? The government rushed in. They said, oh my God, everybody shut your brain off. We have to bail them out. We have to do it now. For the people, yes. For the businesses, no. Because, okay, let's say you bail them out. Then what? The economy is still frozen and it's not going anywhere. There's a pandemic. We're on lockdown virtually. So what are you going to do? You're going to bail them out, and then they're going to come back soon after and say, I need another bailout. Why? I don't know. You bailed out the movie industry, and still nobody showed up. What am I supposed to do? I was able to operate costs for another month, and then I went belly up. So how about you don't bail them out, and instead you do emergency nationalization of these industries? That's what Spain just did with all their hospitals. That's what Spain just did with I believe their airlines too, although I could be wrong about that. But that's what I would do in this situation. Any industry that's coming hat in hand and saying we need to get bailed out, my response is, okay, if you want taxpayer money, then the taxpayers own you. Now this is temporarily nationalized. Now the difference between me and some other lefties is, when I say temporary, I mean temporary. I think that you could have emergency provisions for temporary nationalization, and then, when the time comes and the economy's healthier, you can hand it back off to private ownership. I'm not, totally against all private ownership, full stop. But best case scenario, all these industries get temporarily nationalized because then, you could basically shore them up for eternity because they're owned by the people, okay? And you could handle people not showing up because you don't have to run a profit. It's, the government is the owner of last resort, if you will. So that's what I would do, but I know Trump's not going to do that because the Democrats aren't in favor of that and the Republicans aren't in favor of that. The furthest they go is the government owning some share of the different companies, but the absolute worst case scenario should be what Elizabeth Warren was proposing, which is, okay, if you get bailed out, here are the terms and conditions. And this is what we didn't do in 2008. In 2008, Bush and then Obama and Biden bailed out the big banks and they didn't have any strings attached to it. And then what happened? These same companies that just crashed the world economy and made terrible decisions, the CEOs got bonuses. They got bonuses. So we need to make sure that doesn't happen again. There need to be rules. There need to be requirements. Okay, if you get a bailout, CEOs don't get a bonus for X amount of years. You know, if you get a bailout, stock buybacks are banned. You're not allowed to do any more stock buybacks, which don't help anybody and just artificially inflate your own stock price. You're not allowed to do that. You have to have an emergency funds. You have to have leveraging rules. Like, there's so many things that you can do to ensure, to safeguard from another crash. But what happened is in 2008, the government rushed in, bailed out Wall Street, and then Wall Street went right back to what they were doing before because it's called moral hazard. There were no consequences for their actions. And the lesson they took away was, hey, we could still be as reckless as possible. We could still be super risky. We could still over leverage. And if we ever go belly up, the government will save us. It'll be the same situation for these companies today that are asking for a bailout. So again, the thing you should do is emergency bailout of the people, but when it comes to the industries, temporary nationalization. But worst case scenario is you do a bailout of these industries, but with strict rules associated with it to make sure this doesn't happen again. But honestly, I'm not a fan of even that. I would rather temporarily nationalize them than anything else. Because even if you bail out, and even if you bail out with strict requirements, guys, the companies can still go belly up soon because there's going to be no cash flow. The economy's grinding to a halt because it has to, because we have a freaking pandemic. So I wouldn't do that. But and here's what you're witnessing right now. All of a sudden, there's a crisis. Everybody's a socialist now. Everybody. The Democrats are even less so than the Republicans, although some of their ideas are good, I should say. But, Donald Trump and all of his advisors, these are all people who pretend to be hardcore free market people. And they're like, all right, everybody line up for bailouts. Lining up for bailouts, that's corporate socialism. That's what that is. Corporate socialism, also known as corporatism. So you're all corporatists. For me, I'm all about bailing out the people. And for the businesses, I think you should temporarily nationalize them until the economy fires back up, and then you could give it back off to private ownership. So that's my take on the situation. There are good things and bad things coming out of Washington now. That first bill was total trash, doing paid sick leave for 20% of workers. You needed to do it for all workers. And now the move is bail out the people and the industries. In my opinion, half the bill will probably be decent. The part that bails out the people. The other half the bill, I'm bracing for terrible news on just how much money we're throwing at these companies. And how it will probably be to no avail anyway. Just like the Fed was pumping trillions of dollars in the stock market over the course of a couple days, we're also witnessing a mess on that front too when it comes to these companies. So this is unlike anything I've ever seen in my life. I was following politics very closely during the subprime mortgage crisis and the Great Recession, and I could safely say that wasn't as crazy as what we're witnessing now with the pandemic and the stock market crash that's kind of similar to the 2009, 1929, I should say, Great Depression. So buckle up because it's going to get ugly, but I hope everybody out there is still social distancing.